and welcome to this revision lesson on the sociology of crime and deviance, and this will focus particularly on the theories of crime, deviance, social control and social order. You will need some of the revision resources with you, and you should have had these sent to you already, but if you have not, you will find a link to those resources in the description at the bottom of this video. So, get those resources, get ready, and settle in for some revision. So, you will find on the second page of your lesson notes template, your revision materials, you will find this overview of the revision process. You're quite familiar with this. In order to revise things, we need to create some revision notes, we need to learn some revision notes, we need to develop some application and analysis skills, and then we need to practice some exam questions. So this booklet is going to help you to do that. You can see that the 7 main theories of crime, deviance, social order, and social control are functionalism, Marxism, Neo Marxism, subcultural views, labeling, new right realism, and new left realism. And there are some key questions there to think about in relation to these theories. What causes crime? How is social order maintained? How is social control exercised? Why do different groups and individuals commit different types of crime? How is deviance labelled or socially constructed? What are the best ways to deal with criminals? And how should crime be reduced? So you have a series of key questions to think about in relation to those theories. We're going to start with a little overview of how some of these theories fit together. It's important that we start to think in the revision process about how we can group theories together and how we can start to evaluate them on a wider sociological theory level. We can start to look at the overall theory and how that links to other theories. Okay, so the starting point for all this is the two structural approaches of Marxism and functionalism. Marxism saying that crime is criminogenic, it is caused by capitalism. Capitalism exists, therefore there is crime. And functionalism, which suggests that every society needs a certain amount of crime because it performs a function for society. It helps to maintain a sense of social solidarity, it reinforces collective conscience and norms and values, etc. These are structural approaches because they look at society in a very top-down social structures approach. That this one structure, whether it be capitalism or whether it be the ideas of functionalism based on the fact that different parts of society work together as different organisms, as part of a wider whole, and serve certain functions for that society. They have a meta-narrative. Everything that functionalist talks about is about the functions of something in society, and everything that Marxist talks about links back to capitalism and the class inequality in society. So they are meta-narratives. They are one explanation for all of the different phenomena in society. And so as a result of that, they can be criticised for being meta-narratives. They can be criticised for being too deterministic. They can be criticised for not looking at alternatives, for ignoring the victims. Both functionalism and Marxism treat crime in a very abstract way. They look at it in a very theoretical way and don't really take into account the fact that obviously crime has a significant impact on the lives of people, and it has a significant impact on victims, and it has a significantly negative impact on society in many ways. Moving on to some adaptations of these structural approaches, so subcultural theory and neo-Marxism both do have an element of structure about them, because they are talking about the subcultural theory, for example, is talking about different subcultural groups that exist inside the mainstream structure of society. So these little subcultural groups exist with their own little values, their own little pockets of beliefs and ideas that exist within a wider structure but are different to that wider structure. So you can have subcultural approaches from a Marxist perspective, some conflict subcultural approaches, looking at the way maybe some working class subcultures are part of a reaction to capitalism. Or you can have subcultural approach like the approach of, say, Albert Cohen, or with status frustration, or the Chicago School. Those subcultural approaches grow out of a functionalist tradition. So they look at society as a structure with shared norms and values that people have changed or adapted to form different subcultural groups. If we think about neo-Marxism, neo-Marxists, obviously the structural element of their theory is that capitalism has a big impact on society, that capitalism and class inequality are one of the major determinant factors in the way society functions, but they also draw a little bit from labeling theory and the way in which different groups in society are labeled differently, and the way in which the media and the criminal justice system label people in a way that means that some people are more likely to be seen as criminal. And so what we see in that case is something which is not as deterministic as traditional Marxism. It is more voluntaristic, and it draws a little bit from labeling theory as well as drawing from Marxist theory, and aims to have a fully social theory of deviance. The point is that these are adaptations of structural theory. They still see society as existing with an overarching structure controlling that society in some way. And so these ideas of subculture and neo-Marxism grew out of the traditional structural approaches of functionalism and Marxism. What certainly didn't grow out of that, which is entirely different, is labeling theory. Now, labeling theory is a social action theory. So if we think about Marxism, neo-Marxism, functionalism, subculture, starting from the premise that there is a structure in society, that this structure governs the way society operates, and we can measure this structure, and we can measure the impact of the external forces in society on people's lives in an objective way. So crimes are a social fact. The crime figures, the official statistics, they represent facts that can be discovered. So the causes of crime can be discovered because we can try and understand the structure of society that has an impact on people, which then leads to crime. Labeling theory does not think that. Labeling theory is a social action theory which starts from the premise that it is not society as a structure that is governing and controlling social actors, but instead it is social actors, it is individuals that are shaping the society. It is their interactions and it's their choices that create the way in which society operates. And so from a labeling theory perspective, they're not trying to answer the question, why do people commit crime? Neo-Marxism, functionalism, Marxism, subcultural theory are all answering the question, why does crime happen? Why do people commit crime? What are the reasons in society that we can find to explain why crime happens? Labeling theory is not trying to answer that question. Labeling theory says that people are labeled differently. They are labeled as criminal or deviant, and in that way, crime is socially constructed. Because if we choose to label some things as criminal or deviant and not others, then we construct crime. If we make marijuana usage legal, then we have suddenly reduced a large amount of crime statistics that would be associated with people using marijuana. So by making marijuana illegal, we have constructed those criminal and deviant acts, because we have decided to label people who are smoking marijuana, dealing marijuana, growing marijuana, or whatever. We have labeled those people as deviant. Okay. Now, the final two theories are New Left Realism and New Right Realism, and these theories are different again, because these are the only theories out of the 7 that seek to try and solve the problem, seek to try and see crime as a problem that can be fixed, can be reduced. All of the other theories are looking at it from in a very abstract way, without thinking about the consequences of the lives of the people who might be affected by crime. Realist theories that grew up in the late 20th century looked at the idea that even though society is more prosperous than it has been before, people are still committing crime and it's still damaging communities. So what are the reasons for this? We know that New Right sees the root of these problems in broken families, the reduction of traditional values. It sees single-parent households as a problem. It sees some communities that don't have strong values as a problem, and their way of dealing with this is to clamp down by having zero tolerance policing. The broken windows policy of Wilson, that if you crack down on tiny little bits of social disorder, then you won't allow more serious crimes to develop. And they also believe, to a certain extent, the New Right, that people from a lower socioeconomic background are almost biologically predisposed to be involved in crime. The New Left perspective, from the other side of the political spectrum, looks at it in a different way and says that crime is created by people who feel left out of mainstream society. So they feel marginalized, they feel relative deprivation, and what we need to do in order to reduce crime is to deal with these root problems that exist. So it's that New Left phrase of tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. What can we do to build community centres, to invest in education, to improve the lives of people who live in these communities that feel left out from the rest of society, give these people a better chance, which will mean that there'll be less crime in the end. Okay, so we've got a little overview there of the 7 main theories, and we want to start thinking about how we would revise. First part of revise is to create some revision notes. Now, you've seen this material before. Here are some general overviews for functionalism, for Marxism and Neo Marxism, for subcultural theories, for labeling theory, for New Left, and for New Right. And what you need to do to create your revision notes is you need, for each of the theories, to take this as a starting point and create some revision notes. So you need to look at your own notes that you've completed, you need to look at the bits of the textbook that are relevant to this, and you need to add to what is here. Now, what is here is fine as a starting point, but it's not as in-depth as it needs to be if you're really going to have some high-quality revision notes on each of the theories. Now, to help you with that, to add to some details, and to help you to create some good revision notes, there are also in your lesson notes template some flashcards. Some flashcards for sociologists who adopt or who belong to one of the 7 theories. So you can see in the top right hand corner of the flashcards, it tells you which theory they relate to, and it shows you in the bullet points what the main ideas of that theorist are. So you've got some for subculture and functionalism and Marxism, and for neo-Marxism, and you've got some for labeling theory. There are lots, is what I'm trying to say. There are all the way down to New Right and New Left. Now you can use these to help you when you are developing some high quality revision notes on each of the theories. And what you can do to the flashcards is you can also, again, use your own notes, use the textbook to develop some evaluation of these different theorists, these different sociologists. So you've got Clarke, for example, here on the New Right flashcard in front of you. And Clarke is arguing that the decision to commit crime is a rational choice based on a rational calculation of the likely consequence. The perceived costs of crime are low, that is why the crime rate is increased. Now, there's quite a clear criticism of that from a New Left perspective, from a conflict perspective, that actually it's not a rational choice to commit a crime. People don't walk down the street and go, "Ooh, I can see a window's open. I'm going to go in that house and burgle it." It's not that simple. It's not that if you had the window closed, they would go, "Oh, I'm not going to do any burgling today because that window is closed." The reality is that wider structural inequalities are going to lead some people in society to be more likely to need or to feel the temptation to be involved in crime than others. So, one criticism of Clarke is that rational choice theory ignores wider structural inequality that might be the real reason why some people commit crime and some people don't. So you can use these flashcards to help when you are doing the overview of each theory. But what you can also do is you could write on the flashcards some criticisms, some evaluations of the different sociologists, so that you are starting to think in an evaluative way about the different theories. Okay, so making your revision note overview for each of the theories and having your flashcards and learning those deals with the first 2 points of the revision process. You create the materials that you need and then you learn them, and that's pretty boring. You just get somebody to test you on your flashcards, or you have your revision page on functionalism or Marxism and you cover it over, write down what you can remember, look at it, check what you got, check what you missed, add it in, try again in a few days' time to see if you can remember the stuff. The next part of the revision process is where you actually start to apply that and you start to develop some analysis. Now, part of the development of some analysis comes from what we've said about writing some evaluations on your flashcards. But there is also a next step of developing some evaluation, which again we've talked about before and we've made a start on, but it's important that we use it as the next step in the revision process to develop some really clear evaluation of some of the key theories. Okay, so you will be familiar with this table here, which is a vehicle for developing some evaluation. All right. If you get asked an essay question or even a 10-mark question, and we're going to have a look at some of those in a moment, you will be asked about the usefulness, about the importance, about the validity, about the way in which a particular theory contributes to our understanding of crime and deviance. So by developing this evaluative table for each of the theories, you are in effect producing a little mini plan for a 10-mark or an essay 30-mark question that you might do in relation to any of these theories of crime and deviance. So the third step of the revision process, so you've started to learn your flashcards, you've done your revision notes for each theory, is to then sit down and think, right, how would I really evaluate this theory? What's useful about it? What are its key ideas? What key sociologists do I remember from my flashcards? What specific criticisms, and that's the internal criticisms, that's the second column. So what have I written on my flashcards about that could be a specific criticism of this particular sociologist? Or what specific criticisms do I have of the particular theory? And then in the other column, and this is why we introduced the information as structural approaches, adaptation of structural approaches, you can then start to look at things from a more developed theoretical standpoint when you are starting to develop some evaluation. So, for example, you could criticize some of the structural approaches from a labeling theory, from a social action perspective. You could obviously criticize labeling from a social structure perspective. Labeling isn't answering the question, why do people commit crime? It's not grounding theory in an actual structure. You could look at Marxist and Neo Marxist and you could criticize them from a functionalist perspective, or you could criticize functionalism because, from a Neo Marxist perspective, it doesn't see the conflict in society that's created by class inequality. If you look at the first five theories, you could criticize them from a realist perspective for not being for being too abstract, for being too theoretical and not thinking about the actual problems that are caused by crime for communities, and not looking at the victims and how crime impacts on them. So this table is really important as a vehicle for starting to develop and starting to apply some skills of analysis and evaluation. Okay, so once you have created your page like this with specific internal criticisms, evaluations, external criticisms, once you really start to get familiar with each theory, then you can think about doing some practice of exam questions. The final part of revision should always be practicing what you're actually going to have to do in the exam, because you are training yourself to be able to be successful at a particular discipline. Well, you should practice that discipline. If you were a sprinter training for the Olympics, then you would do lots of strength and conditioning training. You would practice lots of sprints, and you would practice your starts, and you would practice your acceleration and your transitions. So you would practice your way of answering questions. That's part of the revision process to get ready for an exam. So you can see here, this is what a classic paper 3 crime and deviance looks like. You've got a 4-mark and a 6-mark question at the start, which is small questions. You can bullet point your answers. You can write in short sentences. You don't have to write at any great length. Then you've got a 10-mark question, apply and analyze, which is very much like the 10-mark question that you find on paper 2. Then you've got your 30-mark essay question, and then you can ignore 5 and 6 for now. They are the theory and methods questions that we will prepare for later in the Crime and Deviance and Theory and Methods course. So we're just looking at questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the moment. And what we have here towards the end of your lesson notes template, starting on page 29, we have some examples of 4 and 6-mark questions here, and a 10-mark question, and then 2 essay questions that focus only on the theories, only on the 7 theories. So these are the questions that exist from past papers and from specimen papers that relate to the theories of crime and deviance. So you could start to set some other questions for yourself as well. If you look at this question here, which focuses on outline 3 criticisms of the labeling theory of crime and deviance, well, you could just change that to functionalist theory or subcultural theory or any of the other theories. That's a type of 6-mark question they could ask about any of the theories. Similarly, with some of the essay questions towards the end, evaluate the usefulness of labeling, evaluate the usefulness of functionalist approach. Well, just substitute labeling or functionalist with any of the other theories that you've studied. Okay, so that the final stage of the revision process is to have a go at starting to plan out some answers, starting to write some parts of some answers, and that is going to help to hone your skills and get you trained up, ready for the exam. Okay, so there we have it. You will not do all of this work in one go. You will dip into different theories. You can use the resources that you've been given here, the flashcards. You've got everything that you need in this video to help you to start to do some revision. And you can chip away at it. You do a little bit on one theory, and then go back to it a few weeks later, do some stuff on each theory, take it gently, do little bits regularly, and that will help it to stay in your mind, and it will help you to develop some confidence with the material. Okay, so I hope this has been useful. I hope you're going to find it helpful to use this video. There's no other point in me making it if it hasn't proved to be useful for you. So hopefully it is. until next time, take care. See you later. Goodbye.